Wall is on the line, Labour Senator. And Mark, you've been listening to what Niamh has had to say. What's your overall view and overall response?
Well, Niamh's story's been replicated throughout Kildare on a daily basis with me, Owen, and that's why I continue to raise Niamh's case and indeed everyone's case for families, because not only are we talking about assessment of need, but you mentioned the carers allowance, and only this week I raised the means test and the carers allowance at our Social Protection Committee, the Oireachtas Social Protection Committee. The means test on carers allowance needs to be scrapped. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Carers in this country are saving €20 billion a year, saving the state €20 billion. But when you go for a reassessment for carers allowance, a lot of people are losing it because in these cases it was just an hour and a half. But in other cases, there may be a change in wages coming into the home and they're losing it for that as well. And it puts so much stress on families. Oh, and I've had a number of cases that are read into the record during the week at the Social Protection Committee. It's just not on. As I say, when you realise, you sit down, that these carers are saving the state $20 billion, it just beggars belief that they're actually being put through this.
Yeah, and again, when we spoke to Aisling, Lourdes and Samantha on the programme last week, I made that point that what happens if the carers around the country throw their hands up in the air and say, we're not doing this anymore, how would the state react? And the point that Aisling made was the state know that we won't do that because we love our children too much, and maybe that's why they're being left behind. A lot of people are texting in here, one saying my grandsons are 6 years waiting as well for an assessment of need. Another one says, I'm retired now, but I have experience of working in the assessment of need, and it's terrible to know that the assessment of need process has not improved. Liz says, I agree with Niamh, our children are ignored, we're in the same boat as her. And another one says, my son aged 11 has had an assessment of need, but it really makes no difference. Unless you have a life-limiting condition, you're on your own. He was non-verbal until the age of 5. He received speech and language through primary care with a fantastic therapist. Because he was diagnosed with autism and sensory processing, he was referred to SKNDT, and they're a disaster. It's the same story day in, day out. Recruiting and retention of staff, nothing, absolutely nothing. Only for the routine of school, we will be lost. I'm tired of fighting for him. It's not worth the stress, says Trina. And I mean, it's heartbreaking to hear those stories, Mark.
Yeah, and they're being replicated on, as I said, on a daily basis here in Kildare. Like, all these people are looking for is help for their loved ones, and early intervention is the word I continue to hear from families. Early intervention is essential, but as those texters and your listeners are saying, they're waiting up to 6 years. This is all about choices. The government realised this. Like, you know, the figures are that we had 1,986 families at the end of quarter two in 2023, and as you stated this morning, that's up to 3,248 in CHO7, and indeed almost 905 families here in Kildare, Wicklow, waiting on assessment of need for their loved ones. And I continuously be told by the HSE when I raise this that you don't need an assessment of need, but I wish they would tell that to the clinicians that their families are going to, because that's the first question they're asked: have you had an assessment of need? And you also, you know, and Eve mentioned in relation to social welfare payments, you need that for social welfare payments as well. You know, that's essential as well, and we need to address it. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and you know, I will continue to fight for these families, and they need help, Owen, and that's the message that's coming out loud and clear. It's the message that came out over the weekend to me, and it's definitely the message that's coming out through your show today. Yeah,
and the last time we spoke to you, Mark, I think there were 6,500 children on the waiting list nationally. That has risen now to 10,000 children awaiting an assessment. So those lists are growing. Finally then, Mark, from a political point of view, what can actually be done here? Because it's one thing stating there's a problem and the assessment of needs system here is not working with that many people on the waiting list. What can the government and what can the HSE do? Is it a case of recruit more? Is it a case of maybe relax the need for an assessment of need, or what?
Well, we got a commitment through the Dáil from the Minister Rabbit in last August that she was going to start using the private sector more. I note in one of the replies that my colleague Sean Sherlock PD received is that they're actually now tendering through the private service for assessment of need. That's one of the ways that needs to happen, and it needs to happen urgently, because we need to look at the High Court case that Niamh mentioned and ensure that those people that are waiting that length of time are actually assessed, and then put our efforts into those families that are waiting the 4 and 5 years after that. So the private sector has a role to play here. We need to use recruitment. I've said before, we need to go to places like Australia, Canada, and indeed the States to bring back those clinicians that we need for assessment of needs and the further services that are needed for these families as well. And that involves housing and other issues that I've discussed with you before. So that's what needs to happen here. And, the commitment was given by Minister Rabbit. I take her bona fides in relation to this, but unfortunately the figures are growing and there's more cases like Niamh coming to me on an almost daily basis. So action is needed for the government, and action is needed now.
All right, Labour Senator Mark Wall, thanks for that, Mark. And